Chapter 683, So You Are Here as Well. Black spirit body threads that stemmed from different life forms appeared in Klein's vision, but he didn't immediately extend his spirituality to attempt to control them. After distinguishing and confirming which spirit body threads belonged to Molsona, he gulped a mouthful of malt beer as he began to focus on the boxing match in the ring, just like a real member of the audience. The two boxers had their tops bare and didn't wear any protective gear. They fought all out, constantly clashing with each other as fist met flesh, and the situation quickly escalated to a fervor. Many of the alcoholic gamblers had adrenaline pumping through them as they shouted for the boxer they supported passionately, yelling, "Kill him! Finish that son of a bitch!" On the second floor, Molsona also forgot the cigar in his hand as he was fixated on the ring below, his hands clenched tightly into fists. Apart from those who had to have their backs facing him, because they were keeping tabs on any suspicious people or watching the important regions, such as the rooftop or area beneath, the people around him couldn't help but have their eyes peeled to the intense boxing match. Klein raised his hand again, gulping a mouthful of beer as though he was out of breath from the tense atmosphere. At this moment, his spirituality silently extended and grabbed onto the illusory black threads corresponding to Molsona. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The brandy-nosed Molsona was just about to pump his fist a little as though he was in the ring himself when he suddenly found his brain go numb. He felt the surroundings abruptly turn odd, as though several panes of glass were in between him and them. Molsona immediately discovered that his thoughts had clearly slowed down, as though all the parts in his brain had suddenly rusted. As the target was only an ordinary person whose spirit body was far inferior to that of a Beyonder, Klein took less than 20 seconds to achieve initial control over him. 7 seconds. All it took was 7 seconds. Oh no, something wrong is happening. It's likely a Beyonder with relatively special powers. Molsona, who often interacted with pirates, was no stranger to the mysterious world. It was why he spent large sums of money to hire Beyonders to protect himself. If he hadn't long destroyed his body with sex and alcohol, making his psyche relatively weak and his condition terrible, giving him a high chance of losing control if he were to consume a potion, he would have also wished to obtain supernatural powers himself. At that moment, as his thoughts were slowing down, and due to his lack of experience, Molsona spent more than 10 seconds to figure out that he was under assault. He immediately reached out his arm and opened his mouth in an attempt to shout for help. However, his actions were extremely slow, and his voice was weak. With a number of his bodyguards around him, engrossed in the exciting and nerve-wracking boxing match, and the audiences roaring in an ever-increasing crescendo, as well as all the guards along the perimeter putting their attention on any possible attack locations to protect their employer, his obvious abnormality ended up being neglected. When the climax of the match received a temporary respite, a number of bodyguards and subordinates turned to look back at their boss, and they saw that his eyes appeared somewhat in a daze. His hands didn't seem to be in the right place, as if he was still caught up in the match, anxiously awaiting the final results. The corners of the mob boss's eyes had tears welling up as he tried hard to release his fingers to drop the cigar to attract the attention of his subordinates, but he discovered in despair that his line of thought was becoming highly impeded and stiff. Even a simple action needed more than a minute to complete, and his fingers were even resisting his will. Puh! The burning cigar finally fell to the ground as Molsona's tears flowed down to his neck across his cheeks. A few bodyguards discovered this and were just about to ask their boss if it was because the match was too exciting when Molsona suddenly bent down. As he wiped his face, he picked up the cigar. "That was an excellent match. Give the victor more money." Molsona flicked the cigar and pulled up his collar as he grinned happily. He didn't say exactly how much was to be given, as Klein didn't know the market rates. All he could do was give a vague comment. Yes, Molsona of the Loan's new party had already become his marionette. As this mob boss was only an ordinary person, and his spirit body was even weaker than most healthy humans, all it took was 2 minutes and 15 seconds. If the time needed was any longer, He would have had to divert his attention to create an illusion to create some chaos, making the bodyguards place their attention on protecting Mulsona and not being able to discover his abnormality in time. "Kill him! Kill him!" The shouts of the audience suddenly turned uniform as the match in the ring came to its end. Mulsona also allowed his bodyguards to continue watching the match. When a boxer collapsed to the ground unconscious, Mulsona took a swig of his cigar and said, "To the lounge. I want to take a break." "Yes, boss." His bodyguards and subordinates immediately surrounded him, escorted him to the corridor on the second floor, and helped him open the door to the lounge. After instructing his guards to guard different critical spots and to not disturb him, Mulsona paced around and opened a safe. He found documents involving all kinds of new drugs and selected the most important ones. Following that, he placed the documents and an address he cut from the newspapers, as well as a total of £758 in cash into a briefcase. With a creak, he opened the door and called for a subordinate. "Throw this bag under the 3rd Street lamp around the alley." "Yes, boss." The subordinate didn't inquire why. This was a rule. After closing the door again, Mulsona found 3 candles and items with spirituality, and used a pen and paper to carefully draw the corresponding symbol of the fool: a half-pupilless eye which represented concealment, and the contorted lines which represented change. Then, this mob boss who had become a marionette lit the candles, used cologne to represent essential oil and extract, and solemnly held a bestowment ritual. He softly chanted the fool's honorific name, and he used ancient Hermes, which he originally didn't know, to recite the corresponding incantation. Following that, he picked up the item with spirituality and let it fuse into the wind, constructing an illusory door with the transformed candlelight. If he couldn't find any items with spirituality, Klein had planned on using Mulsona's blood. A human's blood was an item with spirituality to begin with. In the washroom on the 1st floor, Klein took this opportunity by taking 4 steps counterclockwise and going above the gray fog. He didn't use the Black Emperor card, and instead, he directly stirred some of the powers of the mysterious space, combining it with the paper figurine before throwing it through the bestowment door. The pitch blackness immediately transformed into an angel with 12 pairs of wings. It flew through the illusory and mysterious door, passing through the pitch-black depths of the void and arriving where Mulsona was. This was to disrupt any subsequent investigations via divination, prophecy, or other beyonder powers. Right on the heels of that, Klein picked up Creeping Hunger and threw it into the ritual's door. Creeping Hunger arrived in the real world thanks to the bestowment ritual, and it arrived in front of Mulsona. Having not eaten for a long time, it immediately became restless. At this moment, Klein, who had returned to the washroom, controlled the frozen Mulsona from a distance of dozens of meters away to immediately close his mouth and pick up the glove on the altar. A crack opened in the middle of the glove as 2 rows of illusory, white, and eerie teeth were revealed. The senses of the marionette he obtained quickly weakened as he decisively severed his control. The slight backlash made his mind spin, but it didn't take long for him to recover. Then, as though nothing had happened, he left the washroom, returned to the bar counter, and continued drinking the malt beer he didn't finish earlier. At the same time, he found a rat on the 2nd floor through the use of spirit body threads, and he made it become his marionette in less than 2 minutes. The rat began searching for a tunnel and path with rather awkward and unfamiliar motions, and it took quite some time before entering Mulsona's lounge through a hole hidden by a bookshelf. At this moment, a thin glove that resembled human skin lay silently on the ground as there was nothing left behind of Mulsona, not even his clothes. The rat climbed up to the table and bit on the paper with the symbol corresponding to the fool, placing it close to the burning candle. The paper quickly ignited and burned to ashes. After extinguishing the 3 candles and returning them to their original locations, the rat came beside Creeping Hunger and bit onto it. Then it returned via its original path and left Mulsona's lounge. It stealthily ran all the way to the balcony facing the outside on the 2nd story, and it silently climbed down. On the 1st story, where the bar counter was, Klein finished drinking his last mouthful of beer, put down the cup, and slowly stood up. He pressed down on his half-top hat, stuffed his hands into the black double-breasted frock coat, and walked past the alcoholics and gamblers without any haste and came to the streets. Following the light of the street lamps, he entered the alley at a normal pace. While pulling out a paper figurine and lighting it with a flick, he picked up the briefcase thrown under the third street lamp. At this moment, a gray rat came with a thin, human-skinned glove in its mouth out of the shadows. Klein bent his back with a deadpan expression once again and picked up Creeping Hunger. Then the gray rat left on its own, climbing into a rubbish chute and lying there until it lost its breath. With night about to fall, the street lamp illuminated Klein as he stood there, spreading his fingers in an unhurried manner while wearing Creeping Hunger on his left hand. After stretching his finger joints and getting used to the glove, he carried the briefcase and followed the still vibrant and lively Oak Tree Bar before vanishing at the crossroads. He took out the address slip and stamps from the briefcase and left only with the important documents, pasting them onto it. Then, he placed it in a mailbox on the corner of the street. Finally, Klein changed back into J.M. and Sparrow, took a rental carriage, and headed for another bar around the pier. It was a bar provided by Anderson that had relatively more pirates. Upon entering the bar, Klein swept his gaze and took in the interior. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. The figure had a medium-sized build, and his lips were purple. His brown eyes hid an intense maleficence that left one afraid. He was none other than the second mate of the King of Immortality Agalito, Slaughter Kirchhays, with a bounty of 9,500 pounds. Clearly, after escaping via the exit of the dangerous waters, the death announcer had arrived in the nearby Tosgarter Island in search of replenishments. So you are here as well. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up slightly, discovering in a chance encounter the devil who couldn't be more suitable for hunting. Just as he generated that ill intent, Kirchhays sensed him and turned his head to the entrance of the bar. Klein didn't hesitate to grab a beer on the table beside him and threw it over. Right on the heels of that, he drew his revolver and coldly aimed. Bang!